We're very excited to welcome ex-Magistrate David Heilpern. David was appointed as a magistrate in 1998 and was at the time the youngest magistrate in Australia, and he retired in 2020, and that in the bio that's got exclamation marks around it. So it means that he's now really embarked on, helping advocate for cannabis law reform, and particularly through the drive change community. So he's very well placed to be talking about stupid drug laws. So we welcome David to regale us with some very interesting information.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's lovely, of course, always to be here, but I'm reminded of that meme, do I have to keep protesting this shit? Really, do we have to do this over and over again? I'll be speaking at the rally, and I think I'll let my anger out then and have a bit more of a reasoned discussion here, and hopefully some questions, comments, thoughts from you. I've not retired. I thought I'd retired, but now I'm Dean of Law at Southern Cross University for my sins, a full-time job, and we'll see how that goes. But it's nice to be back in academia as well with the sort of whole research component. I did a teeny bit of research recently, which was I went to Casino Race Day, and I went there for a specific reason, and that is to see what sort of drug driving or drink driving there was for that huge event. And of course there was one booze bus. Compare that to the lockdown that we see of Nimbin this weekend. Now, it's not, I just keep saying it over and over again, especially after Tom, who I admire, of course, and his research is brilliant, but this is not a road safety issue. This is a political oppression issue. This is an issue about stopping people coming here to voice our opinions. This is about an attempt to kill MardiGrass. So let's keep it clear. So I think all the drug driving research is really important. But if they were serious about road safety, they would have shut down Casino on race day. They didn't. They would have had drug testing at every entrance exit to Byron Bay Shire over Splendour or Falls. They don't. This is where they target. So, having said that, let's move to stupid drug laws more broadly. I am pretty optimistic that the tide is turning. Now, I first spoke at MardiGrass, at the first MardiGrass, in 1993. So we're 29 years later, and here I am talking again. But, and I looked over that speech, and I thought, I can't give the same speech. Last year I spoke as well. I've been talking about this shit for a long time. But look at the ACT. There was a great paper given here. Decriminalisation of all drugs is on the cards there. Legalisation of effectively of small amounts of cannabis and cultivation. That one state has gone that far territory is pretty exciting. Thailand, of all places, Thailand, really? Like a mate who works in the harm reduction industry just got back from Thailand, and it's awesome. There's just drugs everywhere, cannabis everywhere. Now, admittedly, there's a United Nations American right-wing led reactionary to that, but they're still talking about medicinal cannabis being freely available, and really, once that tide has burst, once that dam has burst, it's pretty hard to turn back the clock. Portugal, of course, so I thought, well, I wouldn't speak at all. I'd just stand up here and say the word Portugal and then sit down, because it says it all. We have a living, breathing country similar to Australia where they've decriminalised all drug possession for 22 years. What have we seen? We've seen less young people using illicit drugs. We've seen less deaths and, most importantly, less drug-related crime. I'll return to this in the speech or the little rave I give at the march this afternoon, at the rally this afternoon. But this is not a peripheral issue. People are dying in the drug wars. They're dying because they can't get access to medication, but they're also dying because it's illegal. So we have people whose lives are being destroyed as a result of illicit drug possession being illegal in this country. We see it in Sydney with all of the deaths. They're all drug-related, all the shootings. We see it at pill testing, overdosing, not allowing that sort of activity, pill testing, to take place. People are dying as a result of prohibition. The largest cause of death of 18 to 25-year-old males is suicide. Women is eating disorders. We are, by virtue of our prohibitionist approach to psychedelic-assisted therapy, we are robbing them of a therapy that might well work with no downside. Our obsession with illicit drugs is killing people, and this is a really important issue. So, Portugal, I could just say that word, sit down and let you do your own research, because it is a living, breathing example of exactly what happens in Western countries when you decriminalise all drugs. And gosh, it's not just me saying it, it's 2 coronial inquiries. It's a commission of inquiry that the Liberal government commissioned onto ICE that said we should decriminalise all drug possession. So this is not just some raving lunatic lawyer, ex-magistrate academic saying it. It is the weight of legal opinion over decades saying it. The first Royal Commission we had into drugs was the Wood Royal Commission. Someone will remind me of the date, but it's more than 25 years ago, decriminalised cannabis. So we are, I think, on the cusp of great change. I think also now that America has really lost its prohibitionist zeal, at least in many, many places, in many states and jurisdictions in America, that it's inevitable that we will follow suit. It may take some more time, but I feel like we are on the cusp of change. So apart from standing up and just saying the words Portugal and sitting down, I thought of some other ways of approaching it that would be perhaps more dramatic and theatrical. I've got a mate who's dying, and I thought we could get him up here and he could get euthanized on stage by his medical team. And I would stand here and just smoke a joint. And then after he died, I would say, well, one of these 2 activities is illegal. Killing someone and smoking a joint. Which one? And we could have a little quiz session, and after he died, then I thought that would be one way of doing it. Then I thought, no, let's go dramatic. And I worked out, I asked David Hallett if there was a lectern here, and I was going to start, I was going to have someone else standing there with a joint, smoking it, right? And I was going to be standing here, I was going to put my arm on a lectern, like that. But before I did that, I was starting my chainsaw. I was going to put my arm on the lectern, and with one hand, I was just going to chop off my arm and bleed. And of course, I'd be okay because there's hemp available, medical, saves, cures everything, right? So I've got a couple of doctors here, so I'd be fine. But once I got your attention, and I'm bleeding a little bit still, I was going to put on a tourniquet. It's okay. So after that, I was going to say, one of these activities is legal and one of them is illegal. It's legal for me to cut off my arm. There is no crime of attempted suicide anymore, but it's illegal for the person there to smoke joints. So we're not actually talking about harm reduction. Which is more harmful? Of course it's more harmful for me to chop off my arm. The law is so stupid in criminalising something like that over something like that. So I thought that was one other way of dealing with my speech to make it a little bit more interesting and exciting. Perhaps it would only be a speech I could give once. It's probably nothing I could repeat. And so I thought I'd save it up for later, but you get the picture. Of course, when I started practicing, there was a range of things that were illegal. Abortion, homosexuality, blasphemy, SP bookmaking, or euthanasia, gay marriage, buggery, all of those things were illegal. And I represented people, happily, who were charged with all of those offences, except euthanasia, but nevertheless, and they're all legal now. You can do all of those things which were perceived to be really harmful to society, prostitution, abortion, euthanasia, all of those things you can do legally now, but you can't smoke a joint. I mean, really, it's just so stupid, hence the title. Neil Pike chose it for me, not me, but great title, really stupid. So, the other thing that I think people don't realise about how stupid the drug laws is that, you do realise, I know you guys do, but a lot of people don't, is the price we pay for policing. In other words, what is happening in Lismore this weekend, by virtue of the fact that there are literally hundreds of police policing this festival? What is really happening as a result of that? Other crimes are not being policed. Domestic violence, child sexual abuse are not being policed because of this obsession with illicit drugs. Now, if you go back 30 odd years, there's a brilliant movie called Nearly Normal Nimbin. How many of you have seen that movie? Documentary series available at the Hemp Embassy still on DVD. I mean, really, doesn't that say it all? Who has DVDs? But nevertheless, it's available. And there's a scene in that where I'm at the police station with Bob Hopkins, who's getting arrested, and I had hair then, and just so you can pick me, and there's a woman who's standing off to one side, and Jenny Kendall, who was the producer of that, goes and talks to her and very sensitively says, what's wrong? She's weeping. And she says, well, I reported a child sexual assault incident to the police just, weeks ago, and they just say they don't have time to police it. And yet here they are busting, helicopters and all the rest. It's 29 years ago. Then a couple of years ago, just before MardiGrass, the police actually raided the Hemp Embassy. They took a look at photos, they seized some items, no charges as a result. But amazingly, they then crossed to a woman who said, this is a commercial TV station, crossed to a woman who said, well, I reported a breach of domestic violence order 3 weeks ago, and the police haven't done anything about that. Yet here there is teams of police and the hit squad and labs and the whole works. Here, what about my breach of a domestic violence order? The price of policing drugs is that other crimes don't get policed. And if we did this study, if I did a study of all of you, in fact, let's imagine I did a study in, anywhere in Australia, and I said, rate these crimes in order of seriousness. Possession of drugs, cannabis, child sexual abuse, domestic violence, etc., etc. Where would people put possession of prohibited drugs? Where would people put driving, not under the influence, but driving with a detectable level of THC in your system? I predict they would put them, everyone, sensible thinking person would put them right at the bottom of the barrel of seriousness and put the other crimes really high. But that does not represent the way policing occurs in this country. And I know this. I sat in Lismore Local Court for 12 years as the magistrate, and I can tell you that drug policing is proactive. In other words, they go out and seek the crime to charge, whereas domestic violence is reactive. They just wait till someone reports it and complains. I want to turn that around. I think domestic violence, child sexual abuse should be proactive policing, and drug law should just disappear for possession. And we would have a much better, and of course drug driving, we would have a much more rational criminal justice system, just like they do in some other countries. It's a weird thing. How have we got here? The police get a single line budget. They get, say, $5 billion to police, and then they choose what matters they're going to police. But what happens in a society where their choices are out of touch with community values of seriousness of crime is a disrespect for the police, a disrespect for their choices. In New South Wales, we used to, many decades ago, have something called a police board, where the community had input into the priorities of policing. We don't have that anymore. The police choose their own priorities. Why do they choose drugs as a high priority? Why do they choose possession of tiny amounts of cannabis as something worth charging and bringing people to court? Sure. I'm not going to answer that question, but it's a question that needs to be asked, particularly because it seems to me to be so irrational. The whole time I was a magistrate, I signed so many search warrants, and they were all, there's some exceptions, so let's not put all, they were all for drugs. But none of them were for domestic violence. So what is this about? Why is it that the drug squads are so well policed, so well resourced, and the child abuse squads are so under-resourced and so small in comparison? Well, I've got you thinking now, I hope. So, I think that there's a lot of poo-pooers about MardiGrass these days. People saying, well, it's just preaching to the converted. I actually don't see it as preaching to the converted. I see it as rallying the troops. This is a long, hard, drawn-out campaign. We are getting nowhere in so many ways. It is so frustrating. But, I'm not comparing it to apartheid or the Holocaust or slavery, but, there have been many battles that have been long and hard, and we need to hang in there. And rallies like this, I think mocking the drug laws by things like bong throwing and hemp Olympics are just fantastic. What else are you going to do? Take it all friggin' seriously? Mockery is a great tool in changing things. And let's not forget, I was reading a book about some of the early suffragettes in Australia, and by God, they copped a lot of shit for decades. This is just so women could get the vote. So we need to not lose heart, and rallies like this, I think, and festivals like this are a really important part of keeping this campaign going. I think that the battle in relation to drug driving, we really need to shift the focus from the whole concept of assessing, Tom's stuff is important and I don't want to poo-poo it, but my view is that actually the focus needs to shift from all of that sort of study to saying this very simple question. Is this research being done on Valium? Is this research being done on other drugs of prescription? And the answer is, well, no, not really. We accept that people take medication. We accept that there will be a level of affectation from that, and we accept that that is a price to pay for people getting medicated and being healthier than they otherwise would be. So, instead of doing all of this research, which is important because that's the battleground that we've been set, my mindset is far more on saying, well, if we don't do this for any other prescription drug, just because cannabis was once completely illicit, that's the whole reason we're having this debate. If cannabis had never been illicit and was just reintroduced as a new drug with phase 3 trials proving its medical benefits, we would not be having this debate about drug driving at all. It's just a historical accident that cannabis was illicit, got swept up in the whole drug driving feast. And in terms of stupid drug laws, I'll say this. If I'm a 19-year-old and I want to go out on a Friday night and have an altered state of consciousness, hopefully so that I can absolve myself of fear of asking the opposite sex to dance, then what am I going to do? Here's my options. I could drink, and if I go to a pub to do that, how much is that going to cost me? I don't know, because I don't drink. But probably like $100 worth of alcohol. Would that be sort of reasonable? Maybe 8 drinks or something like that before I summon up the courage to move to music in a way that might make me attractive to the opposite sex. Or, and by the way, of course, that alcohol will be out of my system by Monday morning, right? So we're pretty safe when I go to be a tiler or a roofer or whatever. When I say out of my system to detectable levels or illicit levels for me to be able to drive to my workplace. So that's option 1. Option 2 is I could smoke cannabis, which would cost me way less, but will I be able to drive on Monday morning or the next day to take my kids, or my nephew to work, to sport, or will I be able to do any of those other things? Will it still be detectable in my urine? Will it still be a problem for me? And the answer is yes. So that's out. So I guess I've got some other alternatives. One of them is ice. That'll cost me about $15. It'll be out of my system within 24 hours in detectable terms. It won't be able to pick up because it's water soluble, not fat soluble, blah, blah. We all know the story. And why not? Why is there a renaissance in LSD and magic mushrooms, psilocybin? Well, part of it is because there's good publicity and good science about therapy, but part of it is also because people are choosing those as their recreational drugs over cannabis because they want to be able to drive. And of course, heroin, psilocybin, LSD are not detectable in terms of the saliva testing that we've got now. So we are pushing our young people from a relatively safe option into ice. We're pushing them into heroin, psilocybin, LSD, rather than the detectable drugs. And this is really stupid. I mean, we all know why that is stupid. And as I say, it's just that accident of fate. So, I guess our frustration is natural. We should be frustrated. We should be angry. We should be directing that as in the best way that we can, and that is speaking out and continuing to speak out. And for those who say, well, drug law is not really an issue, you guys just want to smoke dope, blah, blah, blah. Well, look at the medical benefits. Look at the downside. Look at the deaths as a result of prohibition. Look at the way that policing is being diverted from other things. Look at the way it's pushing young people into much more unhealthy drug habits than they would otherwise have. And look at the benefits of decriminalisation of possession of all drugs from places like Portugal. Look at what's happening in the ACT. Look at the fact that the road toll in Tasmania is not increasing. These are the arguments we need to have every day. What have we got instead? Well, we've got sniffer dogs, we've got strip searches, we've got me going outside in a minute to talk to people who've just been charged with possession of 2 grams of cannabis. I mean, really, give us a break. So, that's the way I see where we are and where we need to the way we need to go. So I hope that's been a reasonable summary of at least my mindset, but I really want to continue the discussion by asking you for your questions and thoughts on what I've just said. Please. Oh, good. Yes. Over this side, there's a gentleman. I can just see, it's a bit hard to see from here.
Thank you, David. What Portugal did back in 2000, what they did back then was pretty cutting edge. And they also had to address, one of the challenges for Portugal. So decriminalisation does not address the issue of where did the drugs come from. And that becomes quite important if you're, for a whole bunch of reasons. In the year 2000, there wasn't really a viable mechanism for the Portuguese to actually legalise and regulate supply of something like cannabis. And it was cutting-edge thinking. It's not really cutting-edge thinking anymore, though, this idea that decriminalisation for cannabis is ultimately where we want to go. If we genuinely believe that it is only a matter of time before our drug laws change, what should we be arguing for? And this is specifically around cannabis, where we have a cannabis industry, legal cannabis industry here in Australia that can actually produce all the cannabis that we need for regulated legal supply. So is not decriminalisation really snatching defeat from the jaws of victory when we should be really arguing strongly for legal, regulated supply of cannabis?
Yep. Look, I think it's a really good argument. I suppose my theory of political change in the drug area is really influenced by the theory of political change. I wish Aidan Ricketts was here because I'll try and mouth what he says and see if it makes any sense. But it's a really good question. But the truth is, you need people arguing both things. You need activists in the legalisation field and activists in the decriminalisation field and activists, with Drive Change, we've copped a lot of shit for saying that only medicinal cannabis users with a prescription should have a defence. And rightly so. It's a piss-weak path to take, truly. It's like the lowest hanging fruit you could imagine. But we made this decision early on, and people who are good strategists and with the industry involved, we made a decision that, well, if we can crack that door open, then we can move forward. Now, I fully respect the reverse argument, which is everyone should be able to drive with detectable levels. Absolutely. But there's room. Bob Brown helped win the Tasmanian Dams dispute because he was in a suit and he was perfectly reasonable and he looked great. And there was a whole lot of people who were out there with dreadlocks and protests and the whole works, I mean, taking a much more radical line. So we need both. The truth is we need people arguing for decriminalisation and people arguing for legalisation. And we need a radical fringe and a straighter middle and a conservative, law society, AMA approach. So my response to that is, yes, of course what we need to move towards is legalisation. And of course decriminalisation is like some sort of middle path that's probably 2 decades outdated. And I guess Canada is the example of that, where they tried a couple of decriminalisation regulation schemes and they've just effectively thrown up their hands and said, fuck it, we're just going to let it all hang loose. Of course. And similarly with other states in America, some states in America. So my answer to that is we need all of it. And a healthy social change debate has extreme elements at either end. It has the people who are prepared to go to jail, some people in this room, for their causes and beliefs. And I mean, it's just awesome. I mean, I'm in awe of people who are prepared to do that. But it also needs the straighty mateys in Parliament doing what they can.
Can I just, unless anyone else, can I just follow up? Because I actually think positioning a legalised, regulated supply should not be seen as that's the extreme position.
Yep.
I actually see that the arguments you can make about this allows taxation, this allows revenue for government, this allows employment for farm workers. Those are things which actually will help win the debate more than simply a decriminalisation argument, which is don't bust us.
Yep.
So regulated, legalised supply should actually be seen as the moderate, conservative reform.
I am with you, and I agree with you. I suppose I used to always say legalise, and now I say decriminalise. You will have noticed I didn't say legalise, and I guess it's because I'm trying to position myself in a more moderate way, and fully happy to have the debate about whether that's valuable or not. The Greens have always run this sort of middle path. They've got the full regulation up there as legislation, and then they're supporting drive change, a change to the drug driving laws that's so minimalist it's nearly a speck in the ocean. But I guess it's a balance. But look, I think it's a great debate to have. There was another question over here, yes?
I was thinking that alcohol, or wine, provides an ideal model for cannabis. You've got lots of small producers, you've got licensed production and licensed sale to adults. What more do you want?
Yeah. So the alcohol as a model of regulation of an industry. Look, yes. Short answer, yes. Why not? I mean, why do we have only one legal altered state of consciousness drug in Australia? And the answer to that is actually we have thousands of them in prescription drugs. So we've got actually really good models of regulation in our country. You can argue that having gambling based in alcohol venues is not really great, but apart from that, we do have models that we can adopt and adapt very quickly to this. And, truth be known, that's what we're doing with cannabis. The medicalisation has its downfall. Mostly it's not, a lot of it's not whole plant. Look, we can argue all of that till the cows come home, but it's, I stood in the hall in 1989, the Bush Factory, with a panel of myself, Harry Freeman, Ian Cohen, Richard Jones, Alex Wodak, talking about making medicinal cannabis available to AIDS, people suffering from HIV/AIDS. And there was an industry here, a free industry, of picking and taking it to people suffering from HIV/AIDS in Sydney. People running the gauntlet, people really risking their lives. So, you know, when you think how far we've come from that, we do have a medical model. It's not faultless. We have stupid driving laws that's stopping the industry being as successful as it should. But eventually, you know, when we have millions of people using THC and CBD as medicine, well, things will have to change. We've got hundreds of thousands, but soon we'll have millions. Why? Because it's a drug that works. And I think that that's a really exciting prospect. You know, we have clinics here and we have fantastic doctors here. I know that there's a couple here. There's also Tay, I forget his first name, sorry. John Tay. We have Ananda Clinic in Byron. I mean, we have doctors whose knowledge about THC and CBD prescription is just fantastic, and they have really helped friends, family members of mine, who have had no other medical success. So I think we're on the cusp of excitement and exactly the kind of regulation that you're talking about. So thank you for that question, comment.
Yep, coming, Andrew. Here we go.
Yeah.
The saliva testing. Many years ago, I was given some information that they began with an Inspector Borman in Victoria just making a personal fortune by buying these tests. I rang the man and had a very brief conversation with him that ended with some words not heard in the Bible as he hung up on me. Is there some mechanism of investigation like Waste Watch and other ways of undermining? I mean, science and logic don't work, but how about pulling the covers back and saying, oh, you crooked bastard, you're raking off this many $1 million from the public purse?
I have been waiting for the agencies that assess efficiency to look at drug driving laws and say, is this the right way to spend the millions and millions of dollars we're spending from road safety budget in New South Wales on 200,000 plus tests per year? Is there any evidence that this is money well spent in terms of saving lives? So yes, so the Accounts Committee, the Auditor General, all of those things, I've been waiting for that. But criminal justice is one area where economics don't work. It's so many, you know, I mean, those of us who've been involved in things like prison reform can show time and time again that sending people to prison is so much more expensive than the alternative, so much more counterproductive than the alternative. So just showing that this is financially completely stupid is not an argument that often wins in the criminal justice sphere. You know, America, the highest imprisonment country, is slowly starting to learn this lesson. Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory, First Nations people, are the most imprisoned race in the world. So our economics plays no part, or a very little part, in the criminal justice system. And what we need to focus on is, well, what is the reason for these drug driving laws and the drug laws? And hopefully I expressed some of the reasons why I see behind that over the last half an hour. And it ain't road safety, it isn't harm reduction, and it's not protecting lives from people cutting off their own arms.
But my question was slightly to the left of that.
Yep.
It's not only that they're poor use of the public purse, but certain individuals appear to be making dirty money, and we have to look at not only how the total amount is spent, but who's getting the percentage of it.
And I agree. It's worthy research, and let's get Four Corners onto it.
One more question. Any more questions? We got one more here, and then that will be the last one.
I'm just wondering, like, from a spiritual perspective, is that too hard politically, like to say that a lot of people do it for spiritual uses?
You know, it's such a good question. When I was an academic last time, so 25 years ago, what was then called AUS, Australian Union of Students, funded me to do a I'm going to swear in a minute, just warning you, to do a campus tour talking about drug law reform. It ages me so much to say that. But I used to start my lecture about drug law reform by telling this joke. Why don't fundamentalist Christians like fucking standing up? And the answer is because it leads to dancing. And people would go, well, what does that have to do with drug law reform? But the truth is that the essence of the fear of drug law reform is a fear of altered states of consciousness. And it's such a good question about the spiritual side of it. You know, what is it that makes us crave an altered state of consciousness? I was only half joking about the man, the 19-year-old in the pub wanting to get so out of it so that they get the courage to move to music and pick up chicks. You know, the truth is that the essence of drug prohibitionism is fear of altered states of consciousness. And we can look at it in terms of, the fact that women, were told that they were being hysterical when they were using drugs. So the truth is that there really is a spiritual element to this, and it's part of the fear that keeps drugs prohibited. And we can see this too in cultures that are using altered states of consciousness as part of ritual. And, you go to places like, in Nepal a few years ago where cannabis is smoked up in the hills, as we all know. But it's not just people puffing on a joint. They sit around in a circle, they pass the joint around, and there's a reason for passing joints around a circle. It's so you know how stoned you are by the time the joint comes back to you. It's not like sitting in your bathroom sucking on a bong. There is a spiritual side to altered states of consciousness, and we do need to reclaim that as part of ending prohibition, because otherwise what we're doing is just licensing drug abuse, and no one wants to see that. We need to, if you like, and this is a whole other discussion and it's such a great question, we need to re-ritualise and re-spiritualise our drug use so that it's not destructive. Jonathan Hari says the gateway to hard drugs is not soft drugs. The gateway to hard drugs is trauma. And we really need to recapture that in terms of the healing and the spiritual side of drug use. So it's a terrific question, and it's probably a discussion that there hasn't been enough of at MardiGrass over the last 29 years. I'm delegating you to research it and give so I'm really happy to join with you, and we could give a talk about spirituality and drug use next year. How about it?
That sounds fantastic, David, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And also, could you please very much thank our sound people walking around with the microphones, our recording and everybody else person there.
AV guys, yeah.
The MC with the most talent in Nimbin. And really, I just are quiet because they're not here. But look, the amount of work people put into putting this festival on, no one makes money out of this. In fact, the vast majority of people are all unpaid. So let's, in our own hearts, take compassion, empathy and warmth towards all of those people who put so much effort in. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.